Lawyers, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose, and why? I worked at a civil firm, and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant a-hole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable crap holes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many, many people. Trying to defend this indefensible a-hole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Next story. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip, kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults, and especially the elderly, can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating and gets the most of the settlement money paid to his kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got lots of money for your kid's injuries." Next story. Family lawyer here. Associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called, but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Next story. Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of crap. Next story. Not quite, but I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird. Next story. Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it, that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. It's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute or lawsuit once you found arguments for the case. Yeah, I think people that are good at this are just naturally they play devil's advocate in every argument, like whether they agree with the position or not, you have to be able to firmly argue both sides in order to be a good lawyer. After all, it's not about uncovering the truth, it's about convincing a jury that what you're saying is true. Next story. A serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years. The client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that's literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with that's worth $600K might be hers because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case. Next story. Not a lawyer, but I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One of them told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for murder in SA. The dude was apparently crazy as F, and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained chained to a chair with a mask on, Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever God was listening that he would effing lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm. Next story. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction. To save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases, I'm rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. You win some, you lose some. If client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up. And I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where a client has unreasonable demands or expectations, and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an a-hole. Next story. Obligatory not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care or hope they lose. For example, if you're a public defender and you're defending some sort of assayer, predator, etc., you really, really hope they lose, or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the crappiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a assayer, and sadly, many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose, in fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure defendants' rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this are smaller cases where they're thinking, this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute, and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose, unless they're getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win. Next story. I'm an intern at a PD's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are a-hole clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar. Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger-happy armed robbers, predators, etc. The PDs fight like hell for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for who's currently looking at anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm going to do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot, and I'm not terribly sad about it. I suppose that's the positive win-win way to look at it. It's like you either do your job and you get paid and you're an amazing PD, or, an awful person gets locked up and serves a long sentence. So, yeah, optimism. Next story. I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because A, that's a effing insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth, and B, he was a vet who was injured in combat, and C, he was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My a-hole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified because I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total because the judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. Next story. Immigration lawyer had a client sign up after having his visa canceled as he was convicted for essaying his ex-partner's kid. I wasn't in a position in my firm to refuse clients because I'm a junior and senior lawyers would go nuts. We had multiple risk assessments since his offending, saying he was the lowest of low risk, and testimony that he wasn't a predator. Got his visa back for him. Still don't know how I feel about it. I didn't want him to lose the case per se, I just wasn't expecting it to be successful. Next story. Defense attorney. Mix of retrained clients and contract work with the state public defender's office when they have conflicts. All the time. Child defense where the evidence is overwhelming and the client wants a trial. Sometimes they want a trial because they're psychopaths, sometimes because they're so shamed they're in denial, and sometimes as a coping mechanism. It's easier to blame the victim, jury, cops, lawyers, and the judge than admit you effed a minor. My job isn't to like my client or to lie for them, it's to be the gatekeeper. If the state wants a human to die in prison, then they have to follow the law. The need to legally present their evidence, follow the rules of evidence, and prove every element of every offense. No matter the guilt of my client, F them if they don't prove their case. They have detectives, their own investigators, technology before trial, i.e. Celebrite and crime labs, technology at trial, smart boards, experts, etc., friendly former prosecutors as judges, material witness warrants, second chairs, law clerks, and public perception on their side. Next story. Not an attorney, but I work for a state's county court judge. As a clerk, I meet so many people, and unfortunately there are people who you start to recognize. We have some defendants who have 2, 3, and 4 cases. Needless to say, we were happy when they pled versus taking 2+ cases to trial. We also have defendants who are particularly needy, meaning non-compliant with pretrial supervision, picking up new cases, failing to appear, sovereign citizens, etc. While I really do try to stay impartial, it is hard to watch trials where people are blatantly guilty, so it's nice to see juries affirm that. Next story. I used to do plaintiff's work in credit card debt collection cases. Yes, I was that a-hole. One time, we were suing a guy for $3,000. He had some type of cancer of the throat and had one of his jawbones removed. He was in really bad shape. Prior to the hearing, the guy told me he quit paying when his wife left as she couldn't deal with his cancer. Also, his church had collected all they could to help him, $1,000 in cash. Also, he said he was judgment-proof, which means he's so poor there was no way my client would ever see any money from him. Extremely common. I called back to the office with his proposed $1,000 to satisfy the debt in full, and my boss said, quote, "I don't give a F about his jawbone. Tell him $2,000 or no deal." The trial was brutal. He broke down crying when I got him to admit he intentionally didn't pay his credit card bills due to his medical bills. He was clearly broken. I pitied the guy so much, but still did my job and won. We got the full $3,000 in our judgment. By the way, our client was a third-party debt buyer, meaning they bought the debt for 2 cents to the dollar of debt. This means that our client was awarded $3,000 plus court costs plus attorney fees for something they paid $60 for and will never be able to collect on. P.S. Missing jawbone aside, this pathetic scenario was/is not at all uncommon. Next story. I represented a company when there was infighting among the partners. A few of the partners came to me with a plan to buy out another partner. However, this plan was essentially a way to F this person over. I'm not sure if they thought I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, but when I called them out on it, they owned it and said that their plan was to dupe him into taking an offer and then screwing him. I pushed for an amicable resolution, i.e. a fair deal, and they went along with that for a while. The partner they were trying to buy out was not willing to leave without negotiating, and my clients didn't want to hang around. They fired me and are now with someone else. I know the attorney they went to, and I can't imagine they're crossing the unethical line I wouldn't cross. The sad thing is that I really respected these folks, but they clearly did not have any respect for me or their partner. It was gross. Next story. Never. My personal ethics mean I must do anything and everything for my client, falling short of anything illegal or that could get me disbarred. I used to do criminal defense work and had a couple of clients I found to be very reprehensible, but I successfully was able to give them the best defense I could. I don't do any criminal defense work anymore, but not because of some of the reprehensible characters. I I really didn't mind that, just moved on to a different and better paying legal field. Next story. Fresh out of law school, I was working as a public defender. My guy was an unrepentant DUI who made the roads more dangerous for all of us. He got into a non-injury accident, and the police took over an hour to arrive. The prosecutors called well-meaning but incredibly stupid people as witnesses. I gave my guy the best defense I could by making the witness look confused and at fault, and by suggesting that it was possible that my guy was so stressed out by the accident that he started drinking after the fact to calm his nerves. He didn't testify himself, and there was no way to prove he was drinking before the accident. He got off, and about a month later, I quit. Next story. 2 times when I was not quite a lawyer, but doing work experience/student. Predator in court after police found indecent images of minors on his computer. Wanted him to go straight to prison just off of that. I worked in my university's pro bono clinic. We received a request from a convicted predator who was already serving a prison sentence to review his case file to see if he could appeal the length of the sentence on the grounds that he had been sentenced under the wrong sentencing guidelines. Conducted an interview in prison with him and my supervisor. Was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We thankfully couldn't assist. He was polite, and to my naive surprise at the age of 20, likable. Took a long time for me to reconcile those feelings against what I knew he had done. Counterbalance. Work experience at a criminal firm. Defendant was a British veteran who had served in Northern Ireland. Became a drug addict and spiraled into a cycle of criminal behaviors. Clearly was suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues. Was in court for battery and actual bodily harm and was pleading guilty. I, for reasons surpassing understanding, ended up in the interview suite alone with him. I'll never forget how he broke down and described to me how he knew his life was out of control, but couldn't seem to stop or break the cycle. How he so desperately wished that he hadn't ended up back here, and how he'd essentially watched his whole life destroyed. He was crying. I had no idea what to say or do, but I desperately hope he got the help he needed. Those experiences combined were enough to put me off of ever practicing criminal law. Next story. I had a client with a protective order against her ex-husband, and the guy wanted to come get his belongings with some deputies along to make sure he stayed out of trouble. The husband made the motion to go get his stuff, and I was there to oppose it. It was so unreasonable to not rip the band-aid off and just part ways, but she insisted on making this as rough as possible for the guy. I won when the judge suggested a clever idea to make things work logistically, but tediously, for the parties, but I really felt for the guy. He just wanted to take his stuff, and I had to be there to shoot him down. Next story. Criminal lawyer in the UK. I once defended a guy who killed his own newborn child because it was crying so much. Literally hurled the child against the wall. At the time, I'd recently become a father too. I wanted that guy to do serious time. The jury convicted him of murder, and he got a 14-year custodial sentence. I found it really hard not to celebrate. Almost identical set of facts in a 1998 case. R. V. Wolin, 1998, 2AC 82. It's worth a read if you ever feel like you might be a piece of crap. This will make you feel much better about yourself by way of comparison. Next story. Sorry for using phone. I'm a defense attorney. I had a client who committed a triple homicide and bragged to me about it when we first spoke. When I was preparing for the case, I decided that I wouldn't try my hardest. There was a boatload of evidence and at least 6 witnesses. It was a shooting at a small restaurant. He lost the case and was sentenced to first-degree murder. He got 2 life sentences with no parole. Honestly, deep down, I'm glad he's locked away. Yeah, it's always good to hear when someone's personal values, morality, and just being a good human being trumps anything that you could possibly win as, for your job in a case like this. So yeah, good for you, OP. Next story. As a public defender, you're often getting clients that have racked up 6 separate complex cases, plus a probation violation at once, and insist on fighting every single one of them. Not out of a sense of justice or innocence, just an attempt to make things as difficult as possible for the pigs. They will take up an inordinate amount of your time that could be focused on your other cases with actual merit. Don't get me wrong, they're entitled to a defense, and I do everything I'm ethically obligated to do to defend, but when I get a client playing games with taking all their crap cases to trial, I do secretly hope their PO files a revocation on them for not reporting or using drugs on a charge, carrying greater time than they're facing on the pending charges, as that usually convinces them to wrap up their bullcrap cases as probation violations or summary hearings. Next story. I'm not a lawyer, but when I was in 4th grade, my mom and my dad had a case against each other on child custody. I don't know who started it because they still blame each other. I'm 17. I don't remember much, but I do remember when I was going to talk to the court psychologist alone. And Mom had me practice what to tell them before I went there, like it was a school test. She said things like, "No, you can't say it like that. That sounds weird." When I said, "Mom always yells loudly at Dad for a long time every time she picks me up there," and explained to me that it was a discussion between them two about other things. Also, she asked me if I felt safe at home, and I answered no because of the unreasonable yelling and screaming. She yelled and screamed at me. Maybe not so important to the story, but she manipulated me, borrowed $1,400, $14,000 and okay, from my account to run the case, and I won. I did not see my dad for a long time, and have still just seen him a few times a year since that. He's told me that Mom went to the court to take from him all custody, and I believe him. I moved out 1.5 years ago and have not seen much of my mom either. I can't wait till I'm 18 next month and get access to the court documents. I hate them both for what I had to go through, and living with mental abuse the next 6 years with my mom did not help much at all. I still cry when I talk to her, and when I hear loud sounds. I never feel good enough at anything because she told me I wasn't. Now I'm going to a psychologist on my own initiative, because Mom would not let me when I was younger, and I hope to sort some things out. The cruel people in the court can be worse outside the court. Short, my mom manipulated me to lie to the court so she won a case and mentally abused me till I moved out at 16. She still yells and screams at me a few times I talk to her a year. Next story. Not a lawyer, but a friend is. He was working a case against a well-known company for undercooking food and causing a family to get food poisoning. He had told me about how this family is known to the company he works for and tries to gain money from crazy things. This time, he said they had a reasonable case. He went on to speak with the family and asked which company it was, and the mother responded with one company while the dad responded with a completely different company name. My friend then went on to accidentally bring this up in court. TLDR, family tries to sue well-known company, makes mistake, and lawyer accidentally brings up this mistake, causing them to lose. Next story. Not a losing case, but wishing the ground would swallow me up. I used to work in family law, so would turn up to court and work with kids during divorce cases. One case I had to deal with a little girl and had to explain to her what the judge will ask her, which would be choosing which parent they wanted to live with. So my way of explaining it was, think about who you would have the most fun with. Like, I go ice skating, so who would most likely take you ice skating? The little girl was asked by the judge who she wanted to live with, and in front of everyone, pointed at me and said, "I want to live with that lady. She goes ice skating." I felt my boss's eyes burn through the back of my head. Ground, swallow me up, please. Next story. I used to be an insurance defense attorney in-house for a big insurance company, and this happened to me all the time. It was usually because the facts and evidence would show that our defendant was at fault or something, but the insurance adjuster insisted that we fight it. I would do my best to explain to the adjuster why the evidence or law was against us, usually after I had had time to gather the evidence and take plaintiff's deposition, so I had the full picture. But at the end of the day, I had to proceed unless I was instructed to settle. Two stick out of my mind. One case involved defending a driver who sped around the corner and hit kids crossing the street. I had to argue that the injuries weren't that severe because no bones were actually broken. 2, case involved fighting our own insured client who had been in a hit-and-run accident. It was later discovered that the other driver had been high on meth when he ran the stop sign and plowed into the insured client. He had no insurance, so the client needed us, her own insurance company, to pay for her medical bills, but I was instructed to fight her on it in every way possible. Minor accident, not that hurt, bills inflated, she's young so she'll be fine, etc. It all made me feel awful. The good news is that I have now switched over to the plaintiff/claimant side and am so much happier. I can at least use everything I learned from being insurance defense to help my clients. Next story. Yes, it was a life insurance policy. The mother who took out the policy had done a number of things that caused the policy to lapse. A few years later, she quickly died after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. She sued to enforce the policy, her estate continuing the lawsuit after she passed. Legally, she was wrong, and my client, the insurer, was right. She effed up and let the policy lapse, so my client didn't deserve to pay out $1 million. But she had young kids, and the dad was disabled and had a low-paying job, so I felt for them. In the end, we settled for an amount higher than warranted given the risks involved taking it to trial, i.e., the insurance company took a sympathetic view of the situation. It was a sad case all around. Next story. Represented a guy at trial who had beaten up his girlfriend pretty bad. It was a loser, and the trial was more about what the punishment should be rather than whether he had done it. Jury was out for way too long, and when they gave the verdict, it was not guilty. I was astounded. I must be some kind of great lawyer. But no, one of the women on the jury held out, insisting he couldn't have done it in the face of overwhelming evidence of guilt. After the acquittal, we visited with the jury to get feedback about the trial. Judge, prosecutors, and I wandered into the jury room, and everyone's eyes were on this woman. She asked to meet my client. She had fallen in love with him at first sight from the jury box. I told her no, I couldn't do that to her. But his name was there to be known, and I think she got in touch with the guy later. But I really hope she didn't. Guy was an animal. Next story. Several clients come to mind, but the most recent one was a breach of contract case where my client, the defendant, verbally amended several provisions of the contract, deliverables and scope of work. The claimant followed the changes in good faith, costed millions. During the last leg of milestone payments, my client refused to pay, claiming that changes were made at no cost. It ended in settlement. My client was cocky during the entire process. The claimant was an honest old man who was managing his family's firm. It was his son's first major transaction as the heir to the business, and it costed their business millions. When you're young and new to practice, you have this idealism that you will defend people who weren't treated fairly. Several years down the road, you realize it's really a gamble because you never really know how things really are. Next story. I worked at an intellectual property law firm, and I was handling a client who was legitimately trying to get away with trademark squatting. He would get international brands trademarked in his name, and as soon as the brand tried to obtain registrations for their marks in India or use their trademark in India, he would file a suit against them for IP theft and then later sell the trademarks to them at an exorbitant price in exchange for withdrawing the suit. On top of actually committing IP theft, he was an entitled little prick, calling us associates up at odd hours demanding last-minute changes to drafts before filing. He created a WhatsApp group, especially so he could text the entire team with absolutely redundant queries, often asking us to include completely irrelevant information about him and his various brands. Because he had filed multiple suits against multiple brands, for a long time, I was holding all of his trademark matters, and I hated myself for being his lawyer. Next story. Very rarely, if ever, the way I see it, no matter if you're defending a company accused of making a dangerous product, a family law attorney who represents a crappy parent, etc., we need skilled attorneys on both sides of a case who are putting real effort into the litigation. It's the only way for the system to work, and if someone doesn't like it, then they should not be in that field. As a side note, in California, as I'm sure with all states, there's a law that says an attorney cannot sign off on any claim or contention he or she knows to be false and can be sanctioned for it. CCPS 128.7. Next story. How are there no casualty insurance defense? The guys defending the insurance company when their insured ends you. Lawyers here. Several of my friends either are or were, very few do it for long, casualty insurance defense lawyers, and they constantly tell me how much they hate what they're doing. Their entire job is to save $1 trillion insurance company a few bucks at the cost of some poor dude who happened to be in the wrong place when some guy was texting instead of paying attention behind him.